Hi there, I'm Noel Plum, and you are watching The Atheist Edge. At least you will be in a minute.
Hi, welcome to Atheist Edge. I'm Courtney here with
Caleb.
And we actually have a lot in common. We just met today, but I didn't realize, obviously, because I didn't know you, that yeah, we have a lot of things in common. We have very similar work, and I also do have a history in writing poetry, so it's interesting. I was like, oh wow, it's a lot in common. So first of all, I guess we talked off camera a lot about our careers and like what we do, but I guess one thing that started it off was talking about de-escalation. So I guess, do you want to talk about like what you teach, because you teach de-escalation, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a substance abuse counselor at a inpatient treatment facility for adolescents, and so part of my job is I'm the master handle with care trainer on the facility, which means that I teach all the staff how to verbally de-escalate our clients, and also, when necessary, how to intervene physically in moments of like violence or crisis. That's part of my job description.
Okay, and then you did say that it's kind of related to martial arts, the techniques that you use.
Yeah. Well, especially some of the escapes and the restraints are really based on basic self-defense techniques that you would kind of learn in any kind of baseline class.
So I guess what made you get into that? As I'm kind of curious about that.
Well, I mean, I've been into martial arts my whole life, but specifically as part of my career path, it was part of the job description, and so I kind of adopted it and took up that role at the facility because I saw it was a really big need, and kind of just, I guess I just lucked into the position, and I've held that position since we opened, actually, and so it's kind of been my role since we've even been, a standing facility.
And what kind of martial arts is your background?
Boxing and wrestling. Muay Thai, just kind of a good combination. I was never really into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as much, but yeah, I mean a little bit of that as well. Just specific training.
And Jim is more the person to talk to about martial arts, because I know a tiny bit about it, but not a whole lot. And we've had Jason on, who's fourth degree in Taekwondo, so that's been interesting to like go to his testings and things like that. So yeah, I guess back to de-escalation, most people that aren't in the field wouldn't really know what that means or what kind of situation that would entail. So there's a difference between like a verbal de-escalation, which is what my training is in, and a physical de-escalation. So are they both called that?
Well, I mean, you always start at the lowest level of intervention that you can, obviously, and so if that entails verbal de-escalation as your premise, that's where your start is. If I notice somebody who is beginning to have a physiological response to a situation, where I can see they're getting a little flush, maybe they're clenching their hands or they get up and start pacing or whatever, well, I know it's time to intervene verbally before I just go ahead and throw them to the ground. That's not the way the policy works.
Right.
You always want to try to just talk them through the situation, and it comes naturally to some people, more so than others even.
Yeah, and I do remember a big component of our training was kind of verbally giving back, or speaking to the person in a way that kind of lets them know that you do see what they're doing. It's like, I see that you are in this state, and it sort of like is observant, but it also lets them know that what they're doing or what they feel is being seen and validated, and that's kind of a big part of that.
Well, it validates them, but it also empowers them to make the decisions further on their behavior. Specifically when they know that they're out of line, or with my clients, when they know they're out of line, you begin with that verbal de-escalation through offering support, in which case you listen, you accept the validity of their feelings, focus on one issue at a time, you encourage them through that endeavor to be assertive with their emotions rather than aggressive, and then you offer them an alternative, right, and then you fulfill it as if it was a contract. So if I tell a client, hey, would you rather go outside and do some breathing exercises with me instead of blowing up right here in the classroom like you have done before? Would you rather do that, right? And that empowers the client to make that decision rather than telling them what they're going to do. You know, it allows them to actually develop the skills further so that next time when they encounter that situation, that they can actually make that choice in real life, I guess. You know?
Yeah, and that is a big important component to me about working with adolescents especially, and young children too, because you have this, I talked about this when we did the PSA on Camp Quest, that oftentimes younger people don't have a lot of agency in their decisions and in their day, and that especially happens when you have a mental illness and you're kind of, you know, put in a facility and things like that, so you have even less agency than most other kids your age. And so it becomes very important to give a voice and a validity to what the wishes are of these kids. So when I work with kids as well, and with my sessions with them, I try to give them as much say over what we do and what we talk about, and that can be really important.
Yeah, I think with adolescents, especially in the substance abuse setting, they may not have 100% control of their faculties or decision-making capabilities. And so, you know, what are you really hoping to accomplish in that 30, 60, 90-day period of time, however long it is that they're in treatment with you? Is it to get them to modify their behavior momentarily so they don't punch a hole in the fucking wall? Or is it to teach them that life skill so that next time they encounter this situation, you know, outside of treatment, they can actually judge for themselves and determine what the best course of action would be? And I'm inclined to say that, you know, the latter. That's kind of my whole intention behind my career path that I've chosen, is actually teaching these young men how to live life more effectively in a healthy manner, you know, and be productive citizens.
Yeah, and I have a few kids that are like older teenagers that are young black men, and a lot of what I talk about with their parents and them together, and usually the parents start this conversation, but there's a kind of an extra level of responsibility for them because of the added potential danger to them making a wrong decision versus any other person. And so and we talk about how, you know, absolutely none of that is fair, but it is a real thing you have to understand and deal with. I don't know if you guys talk about that at all, that there's kind of a difference between people, how these children will be treated as they get older.
I think the racial component is less important than the setting, the environment that somebody returns to whenever they actually go home. You know, I mean, I've been to prison, and so it's kind of an equal playing field there. And same thing in what people call the streets. You know, I mean, it's less about ethnocentric, you know, ideals. I think more about the decisions and behaviors people make in their personal lives. You know, I actually really wouldn't say that skin has much to do with it at all. You know? Yeah,
well, it's just that, like, I get that that lesson from the parents a lot,
right?
Where if, you know, if these kids aren't able to learn impulse control at this stage, it's like if they get in a certain situation, that has a bigger impact on their safety. And that's more what it's about, is that like you have to learn how to deal with authority figures and how to deal with law enforcement and how to, you know, navigate this because you are perceived differently. And so we kind of talk about that like it's, I think, not learning that impulse control and that kind of distress tolerance is more dangerous and more fatal for certain groups than others.
Yeah, that's why I tell my clients all the time that I'm not their parent, I'm not the law, I'm not shit to them. What I am is a symbol of all of the authority that they will encounter in their life, and that it's healthy for them to develop that relationship with me so that they can kind of carry that on to other authority figures that they experience. Otherwise, they're just going to keep getting into the same cyclical, you know, detrimental situations that they're going, especially with substance abuse. You know, it doesn't discriminate.
Yeah, and that is a very important thing. That the idea that there's so much that we only know if we've dealt with somebody or been in that situation that substance abuse affects. It's a very hard thing to deal with, and it's a very hard thing to see clearly, I think. So I guess in your experience, is there something that's particularly challenging, like communicating with the family about that, or getting resources or anything like that?
Yeah, getting resources is certainly a challenge, especially for adolescents who don't really want the help. You know, a lot of them are still ingrained in this lifestyle that they think they're going to be, professional criminals or drug dealers or gangsters.
Yes.
And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really matter your background, or it's all about their mentality when they come in, and then how I can help them and demonstrate to them what an actual productive life looks like, so that they can change their mindset before they leave.
Right.
Hopefully, so they can. I'm just planting seeds. Is all it is.
Yeah, and that is really unfortunate with especially mental health, but especially with teenagers, that your guidance is only going to take hold if they let it, and so all the work that you do is it's only kind of going to help if they're able to hear it and accept it, and if they're open to it, and that's we call that stages of change.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting thing. There's kind of a clinical rating system that you go through that is where the person is at in terms of being receptive to changing or being in recovery. And so it's interesting, because I think some people see mental health as there's a lot of stigmas around mental health anyway, but it's especially around drug addiction, where people either take all the agency away or put all of the agency on kids or on people with substance abuse issues, where it's like, it's either all of your fault and you have no self-control, or it's completely not, like, there's no way you can get better, I guess. Some people kind of perceive it as like there's no way to control it, it's just gonna do its thing and you have no control, or you have all the control and all the blame. And so I wonder if you deal with that with families, of like just getting them to understand the level of forgiveness of this person, and separating the person from their decisions and their actions, I guess.
Yeah, when it comes from the behavior and the actual intention of the client, trying to make amends with the family. But I think a lot of that stigma comes from the legal issues that we equate with substance abuse. Look at countries like Portugal, who has decriminalized all substance abuse, and now it's a civil offense. So you have to pay a ticket, and you have to go to classes and stuff like that, and to actually recuperate and try to learn coping skills. But it's no longer a criminal offense. So they're changing that stigma from, hey, this person is a criminal, to they're a normal human being with a mental health issue, and let's figure this out on a social level, rather than individualized and point fingers at people and say, hey, it's your fucking problem, you're on drugs, right? I mean, my best friend in the world he's 27, he's about to go to prison again for the second time probably for substance abuse, and the dude smokes weed and takes mushrooms occasionally, and not even the word, he's not a terrible human being, he's a great guy, and he has this stigma that's pushed against him now, because he's going to be he's a 3-time felon now, I think. And it's kind of sad the way that our society kind of warps that image of people.
Yeah, it is really unfortunate, and it's kind of like the difference between, to me, it's the difference between mental illness and physical illness, where like physical illness is something you can't question, but mental illness is something that people don't always see, and is harder to nail down, like what is the illness, what is a decision, especially with things like bipolar and schizophrenia. There's things that seem more gray areas for how much of it is controllable, how much of it is a choice, and I think substance abuse is definitely one of those things that is can very easily fall back on the victim of that as being only like their fault, or a lot of it.
I think it's a good balance between the two. You have to have the motivation and the goals set around your treatment plan. If you don't have those as a foundation, then you're not going to improve at all if you don't want to. But at the same time, you also need that push occasionally, because if people are comfortable in their lifestyle, they're not going to change. I equate substance abuse, a lot of times with religious beliefs and spirituality. Me personally, I had my own entheogenic garden, and I was, manufacturing several different sorts of substances in order to reach a connection with some sort of higher entity within the universe, because I was convinced that there was this universal energy that was pervading all of existence, and I wanted to come in contact with it. You know, like I said, I was a Unitarian for several years, and believed that all religions had something wrong, but they had one little snippet of it correct.
Right.
You know, and there was like this consciousness that was present, you know, ubiquitously throughout all matter that we could contact. You know, there's this network, I guess, of you know, this molecular structure that we could actually like consciously come in contact with, and that was my actual drive for using substances. So really, in reality, religion made me use drugs.
Yeah.
You know, because I was convinced there was a God that I was in contact with through using peyote and mushrooms and DMT and other, you know, psychoactive compounds. And so, I mean, when looked at from that point of view, it's a really controversial issue, because people want to purport religion as a cure for substance abuse, but for me it was the exact opposite. It was the cause of it. That's why I was going out and trying to have all these different wide variety of experiences by combining different compounds, and it escalated really quickly, you know, and started using other stuff, but that was kind of the base for my seeking through using substances.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that is, you know, happening to a lot of people, because it is spiritually connected for a lot of different denominations. So real quick, I want to kind of mention that from what I've experienced, and probably what you've experienced too, that the stage of change where someone is not even open to discussing it, there are clinical things that we do to work with someone when they're in that stage of change. And so
contemplation. Yeah,
and so it's just important that people understand that even if someone seems extremely resistant to this kind of thing, there's still something we can do to get them past that stage. And also that people move to different stages. People move to different attitudes toward recovery and toward how they're doing, and that is an ongoing journey of like moving between stages. And in the mental health field, we talk about also the codependence of substance abuse and other mental illness diagnoses, which is very often connected, but that you can be in a different state of change in your mental illness from your substance abuse. So you can be willing to talk about depression and coping skills, but not willing to talk about changing your substance abuse behaviors.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of wanted to put that out there, that like, if somebody in your life is completely resistant to changing, there are programs out there that can work with them no matter where they're at in that process, and that there are systematic ways of kind of helping someone progress past that point, which is very important for people to know.
And they don't require religion or spiritual beliefs, because that's not a well-defined term.
I don't know if you want to get into that, but I would be curious, like the difference between kind of the religious-based substance abuse things, and what is actually called evidence-based, which seems so, you know, so obvious, the difference, or the which one should be kind of winning the day. But I don't know if you want to speak to kind of there being a difference. I know that there are certain like versions of AA that are secular, but they're obviously not as popular.
Right.
And I don't know if they tend to be more effective than the regular AA, because the regular AA is very ineffective, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually did a whole presentation on this 2 weeks ago for the FFRF.
Yes.
But I mean, any specific questions you have, I don't mind, you know, kind of diving into that topic. Specifically, the kind of the things that kind of indicate to me an ineffective system for, you know, gaining that sobriety, I guess, towards AA, is just their terminology a lot that they use, and also that it's based. I mean, it's based on an antiquated system where doctors actually thought that you were physically having a reaction through an allergy, or an allergic model, right, is what they call it. It's a physical allergy through addiction, saying that people that took a certain substance, right, I can drink this beer and I don't have this reaction and compulsively drink and drink and drink, but somebody else might have that, and they thought that was completely through physiological means. But there's a lot more that was not understood back in the 1930s and 40s when these systems began, you know, when started to become solidified, you know, and we know a lot more about neurochemistry, you know, psychology and sociology, you know, all these different, the biopsychosocial model is what we call it, that wasn't around then, right? So they thought it was purely physiological means. So to have a complete system of sobriety based on something that is only a third of the picture is obviously incomplete. And I think they need to start not only rewording things, but just revamp their whole system to address other issues as well. They only talk about the physical, the physiological characteristics, and the other stuff, it just so happens that they're using, some effective tools, when you're making amends to people, right? Well, yeah, that's healthy for the individual, right? Because psychologically, it helps you kind of clear out it helps you purge all of those nasty beliefs about yourself and other people that you may have been harboring, the bitterness you can have. And that's an effective tool, whether you call it, this 12 steps through spiritual means or not. It can be through secular means. I mean, making amends to somebody not only makes, should, ideally fix the situation, but also makes you feel better as an individual, that you've righted those wrongs that you caused. I always go back to the analogy. Have you ever seen the show My Name is Earl?
That sounds so familiar.
It's a fucking stupid ass show, but it's hilarious. He goes back and he all of a sudden believes in karma because of some situation that happens to him, and so he goes back and makes a list of 100 some odd people that he wronged or something like that, and wants to go back and make all these things right for them, and it's all dramatic and hilarious. But that's a good premise of a show, and that's one good factor to take out of the 12 steps that I actually think is an effective method. In recovery, for treatment for recovery. So.
Yeah, that is a big topic, but I think what scares me about AA being religiously based is it's sort of in order for you to stay in recovery, you have to maintain your religious belief. That it ties the two together in a way that I think is really dangerous for people that may eventually deconvert and might lose their link to recovery. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Well, what you're doing is whenever you submit to like an external power, you're giving away your internal locus of control, and you're letting something else determine the responsibility of your actions. And when you give up that control and your own willpower, I mean, it's demeaning, especially whenever you reach out to contact with that higher power, whatever the hell it is, and it's not there, right? There's no higher power to speak of, right? You lose connection with that community. What happens then? They have nothing to fall back on, right? It was the community and that mild accountability system they have through sponsors that's the effectiveness. So just call it what it is, right? Call it. Those are the sociological factors that make AA actually like slightly, user friendly, and fairly effective. But just you don't have to attach this spiritual baggage to it. Just call it what it is.
Yeah, and it does take away the agency and the credit for how much strength it takes to make that kind of change in your life, and that is really unfortunate. Is that it's credit that these people do deserve of getting themselves through recovery, and that's something that I think the religious aspects of those take that away completely, and that's really unfortunate. But you mentioned locus of control, just for non-psych majors, the internal versus external locus of control, which is kind of assuming that whatever happens to you is because of external means that you have no control over, versus whatever happens you have control over and that you kind of perpetuate. And I think that it is very important to focus recovery around the latter, because it does give you that agency and that responsibility and the credit. So your work with I guess substances and connecting that to your spirituality, is that at all in the music that you do? Because I know that your music is around the atheist topic, but I don't know if it incorporates any of that.
That's one subject that I touch on a lot. Is I make a lot of reference to substances, and I'm not of the mind of when it comes to abstinence versus moderation. I don't necessarily believe that using substances are a negative thing. I think when it's compulsive and it takes over what you would consider a productive lifestyle, purely based on your goals and your means, then it becomes a problem, right? When it's uncontrollable and you can think about nothing else. I always ask my clients, like, what are some things you're passionate about? And I can't really think of a whole lot because they're just coming off a whole lot of drugs. And And for me, and I pretty much get them to agree that they're passionate about, using substances a lot of the times, right? When you think about, right, whenever you're fucking digging through your carpet, picking up seeds and stems, and you say marijuana is not addictive, right? Then you have an actual problem. When you're scraping resin out of a pipe, you're saying, "Oh, I'm not addicted to marijuana," right? There's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes back to people's goals in their life, and I was and still am passionate about the reaction that the human body and mind has to substances. It's still it's really interesting to me, and not that there's any sort of supernatural connection there, but that's the way that our mind reacts to certain substances, certain neurotransmitters, right, and the receptors in our brains. They react to have these different perceptions, right? It shifts our perception just slightly with whatever substance we're using, and so that's why I was kind of of the mind, well, just pile them all on there, right? Like as many as I can at one time, and maybe I can get this like wide spectrum of perception, and be among the gods or whatever. I don't know, whatever new age mumbo jumbo bullshit.
Yeah. Well, and from the psychology background, you've got what it takes to get a diagnosis, a mental health diagnosis, is the two main things are impeding on your functionality and causing distress to yourself or others.
Right.
And I'm curious if that's kind of a similar thing that substance abuse kind of is the threshold of that diagnosis. If it's like along the same lines, or if there's more to that.
Well, with adolescents, it's what the parents determine as substance abuse. So we have a lot of kids coming in that just smoke pot, and I'm like, well, pot should probably be legal, not for 16, 17-year-olds, I don't think. But I think as a general rule, the plant itself, you can't make a plant fucking illegal. What I mean? That's a little bit ridiculous. Now, its usage, possibly, yeah. If it impedes like function while people are driving, or like alcohol, I'm not going to drink 5 or 6 beers and go driving, because it's illegal. The reason it's illegal is because it has a practical implication. If I drink 5 or 6 beers, I'm going to lose a lot more. 9% beers, I'm going to lose, functionality to some certain degree, And I'm not here saying whether or not that's true with marijuana, but the substance itself should be at least decriminalized to a point of recreational use, to allow people to live the lives that they determine for themselves. Adolescence is a bit of a different story.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point of there being moderation versus abstinence, and I'm really interested in that topic of like whether which one is more effective, and I guess you kind of fall on the side of it being up to what works best for the individual.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I go back to what are you passionate about? I was passionate about ingesting drugs for a really long time, and it's still an interesting topic to me. But I've taken that same energy that I wasted on pursuing substances, and turn it into productive means. A lot more toward the creative side, towards music and writing poetry and creating art and stuff like that. And that's become just as much, if not more, of a passion, than I ever was about using substances.
Yeah, and a huge coping skill for a lot of my kids is something creative, something with arts. And I guess, is that what you do with that question, is how to redirect that passion when you ask kids that about what they're passionate about?
Yeah, well, I mean, and there's a lot of different factors that go into it. You just look at somebody's daily schedule. What is that composed of, right? If your ass is just laying around on the couch, playing video games, you say, well, I'm passionate, I love playing video games. Well, how productive is that actually, to your personal benefit, or to your family or society around you, and we have to start getting the youth thinking about more about just themselves and more about the society around them, the greater good of people, and that's kind of my goal of my music, is to teach rational thought to younger individuals, to the youth,
That is becoming a more popular, I guess, orientation toward others, is young people are becoming so much more socially conscious than people used to be at that age. That's interesting. Like politically motivated and, social justice and things like that. Kids are getting extremely involved in a lot of different movements and like being really passionate about that.
Yeah,
like social media.
Yeah, to an extent, I think. For sure.
Yeah.
I think there's some kids that just still don't give a shit. You know.
Yeah, there's a spectrum, but I think there's been some talk about, like, statistically that it's more common among the younger generations than it used to be.
Right.
Which is interesting. I think, the awareness of the immediacy of all of these, the information about what's happening and the movements that are going on. I think that kids are more conscious because it's more available to them to get the information, and so people care just as much as they always have. But I think it's more immediate to them, and it's more personal and available for them to realize that these movements are happening that they can get into.
I would agree with every word of that.
Yeah. So music. We can get right into music because I'm curious. There aren't, like you said earlier, there aren't really that many atheist, like, rap representations. I really love Tim Minchin, and it's very different. It's more comedic, and like Steve Martin is kind of like comedic as well.
Shelley Segal,
yeah, Shelley Segal is awesome. She's been down here. She's been on the show. She's been at Metroplex Atheist doing shows for us. And I did go to the what is that called? The political thing in DC, secular.
The hell's it called, Jim?
What's it called?
Damn it. What's the thing in DC?
The thing in DC.
Not DC.
Every 4 years in DC.
Oh, the Freedom Rally.
Reason Rally. There you go.
Rally.
You guys get
Yeah,
Freedom?
she performed at Reason Rally with what's his name? So I'm having a
Ben
terrible.
Gillette.
What's his name?
Penn Gillette. She performed with Penn Gillette, which was cool because I've met her and I've seen him perform, and I was like, this is so cool. But yeah, so I guess first of all, what got you into this music?
Well, I mean, I've been playing music through several facets since I was, pretty young. Started off playing drums when I was like 8, and then moved to guitar, and then just like a variety, play the keyboard, just kind of like a variety of things, and learned a lot about music theory. But I wasn't terribly concerned with, with doing it, and because I didn't feel like I had a message. You know what I mean? I feel like I felt like I was an instrumentalist. I didn't have much to talk about, and but over the last 10 years or so, I've been writing a lot of poetry, and about the last 3 years of that, they've started to gear more towards like religious aspects, and then more anti-religious themes, and specifically biblically based ideas, because that's the culture I was raised in, particularly. And I'm at the point now where I feel like I actually have a message to share with others, especially with the youth, because that's my clients specifically, who are between 13 and 18 years old, I really kind of click with. Those are my people. Is appealing to this younger generation of specifically men, but any gender, gender fluid individual, I don't care, out there, and that's kind of what I base my message on is rational thought. Have you ever heard of Baba Brinkman? He's a Canadian rapper. He talks about like evolution, and he has a song called Darwin Day, and it's pretty hilarious. But to me, it's a little bit gimmicky. You know what I mean? Like, it's a one-time. Like, I love his music. I'll listen to it. But once you listen to it, it's kind of like, oh, well, that's really cool.
Yeah.
You don't really go back and listen to it over. It's not really something that would I would consider creating like a cult following.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you feel like your music is, or you hope that it will kind of do that instead, right?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of promote the word of antitheism to the youth. Of knowing that, look, the beliefs that the beliefs that you were raised with are probably bullshit. I'm not saying that to 100% certainty, but kids, come on, like, think about it. Let's read the creation myth, read the Gospels side by side, right? Compare them, anything in the Bible, right? And then actually compare it to the history of the church and the cultural context that the setting was placed in at the time that it was written. And if you're a rationally thinking individual, like, it's all pretty much bullshit.
There is a good percentage of people that deconvert while going through seminary, because you learn a lot about not only like the Bible, but how it was written and how everything was put together and why and what made it in, what didn't, and that's really educational for whether it should be taken at face value or not.
Yeah, and it's funny. The more that I read and research, like I'm not even convinced that Jesus was a real person at this point. Like I'm not strictly a mythicist, right? But the more that I listen to Bob Price and Richard Carey, or even Bart Ehrman, I know he's a strict, staunch historicist. But even listening to these individuals talk and doing the research myself, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I watched Zeitgeist the first time when I was like 15 years old, and so, back then, I thought it was a bunch of hullabaloo, and a lot of it's still misinformation. A lot of it's not accurate at all.
Yes.
But the premise of it, right? The premise of the first section of Zeitgeist, talking about the, the similarities between creation myths and the dying and rising gods, is there's a lot of validity there to talk about that. And so, I mean, at this point, I wouldn't call myself a strict mythicist, but I'm getting closer and closer every day.
Yeah, I'm not that strict either, but I'm pretty darn close because there's a lot we can talk about with historicity of Jesus. And I just interviewed Richard Carrier like a week ago, which is so much fun. He's got such a wealth of knowledge, and he's so clear and accurate, and I love it. So I guess what is in your music? What have you got? What have you got that you write about, or what's your perspective that you're coming from?
Perspective. I guess my perspective is that of a white American male.
No. I mean, like, because you talk about like atheism.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, what your I guess message is, or what your purpose
is. I go by the moniker the Great Antitheist, and that's the correct phonetic enunciation, I promise you, of the word.
I wanted to talk about that actually.
Okay.
In a second, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. And so the more that I've kind of delved into religious studies, I went from being a hardcore Christian at a young age to being a Unitarian for a good 10 years of my life or so, to a point now where I'm simply not convinced. Right, I'm not saying 100% one way or the other. I'm not convinced that any sort of supernatural deity exists, and I also reserve the right to, satirically assault any religion that I see fit.
Yeah.
Right, that's my right as an American citizen to say whatever the fuck I want, and so I'm going to do so. That's kind of the point of, being an anti-theist.
Yeah, so the difference between those two is interesting, and one thing that's kind of difficult about like antitheist, is it antitheist? Is that how you say that?
The Great Antitheist.
Okay. Antitheist?
You're saying antithesis, which is
it's
a word.
Right.
That's the closest word
like,
in the English dictionary as antithesis, and so that's how you,
But I do think
antitheist.
I think people call it like anti-theist or anti-theist, and I don't know, like I feel like that makes it a little bit clear about what it means.
Yeah.
Versus something that seems like a completely separate word, but it also does cloud the meaning of it as well, because I do think that it makes it seem like people that are anti-theist are like completely anti everything religion and like not seeing any value whatsoever, and I don't think that's accurate.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm not that necessarily. I'm at the point biblically, right, with the Christian theology. I know a little bit about other religions, and I've studied. I've read the Dhammapada and the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, Rig Veda, and like all these, the I Ching, different like religious texts. But I'm more concerned with Christianity, and so I would say without a shadow of a doubt, if the Christian God was demonstrably proven to exist, with all the characteristics and traits that he presents, I wouldn't worship him. Regardless, if I knew for a matter of fact 100% that he existed, I would not worship that son of a bitch. Yeah. Right, just because all the characteristics that he has. Right. I mean, he's a terrible, I almost said terrible human being, he's a terrible entity, from our human standards. And if we were created with these standards to begin with, and that's how we measure them, I can get pretty much anybody to agree that one, slavery and misogynistic tendencies are negative things to have in a culture, and to incite in a whole race of people. So yeah, specifically the God of the Old Testament, more so even if he existed, I wouldn't worship him. That's what makes me an antitheist.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and I think a lot of people would agree with you on that.
Not that I'm against of every single like aspect of religion, period. You know, I lead my clients through meditation often, and so prayer is just another facet of meditation. So, for instance, I have a kid who is on the spectrum, and he, you know, I'm not giving him enough credit, obviously, but he specifically, he wouldn't understand if I came at him with all of these. All right, let's talk about the Bible and talk about, you know, why it's wrong, right? I just let him have it, right? And I just say, all right, let's do this meditation, and me and you are going to pray together, right? And I let him walk through that, and I'll walk him through the fruits of the Spirit. All right, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, because those are all good qualities to have, whether or not you're secular or spiritual.
Right.
Right. Everybody should want to have those qualities. Right. In an idealistic world, you know, and for this young man specifically, who may not understand, you know, my rationality behind my worldview, it's good just to let him have what he has, right, and give him the practical benefit of the meditation. Psychologically, right, without specifically like injecting my secular means. See what I'm saying? But
yeah, and I guess you could also do that with secular humanism if you wanted to do that with somebody who wasn't religious, in that context of like teaching certain principles and integrity, things like that. So you have brought us some of your lyrics, music, I guess. What would you call it?
oh well, I mean at this point, a couple poems, but yeah, I was. Hopefully we can get some of my music on the show at some point.
Yeah.
My first release will be 4/20/2020. It's Religion is Drugs.
Very nice. That's very clever.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So I don't know.
It's a good release date.
Yeah, yeah. So do we have time to still go through some of this stuff?
I just want to go through one of them just
Yeah.
real quickly. We
Please.
talked about Richard Carrier a minute ago, and this is kind of like my take on mythicism. This is kind of a silly little poem that I wrote. In myths of oh, sorry, let me restart that. You're gonna have to cut that.
I can totally do that.
Son of a bitch. In myths of antiquity, proven historicity, an archetype of salvation was present ubiquitously. Osiris died and rose again, Mithras atoned for all our sin, and Jesus Christ was crucified, and still today we're singing hymns. This cult of human sacrifice, an acolyte of afterlife, where angels fly and demons die from God committing suicide.
Ooh.
Drop the mic on that bitch. That's good.
Wow. I love it. I love it. Very clever.
That's kind of like the premise of my lyrics. So.
Yeah, well, I guess I don't know if you just do that with spoken word, because it seems kind of like slam poetry otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Because that's cool. I love slam
I do
poetry.
a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I say rap music. I fucking hate rap music. I'm
Really?
sorry. I listen to Bob Dylan and Tool, if anybody cares.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, and there are different types of music within the rap community, of like some that seem like legitimate poetry, and some that seem just like the most ridiculous puns that you've ever heard in your life, and simple and complex, and so it's interesting. There's a lot to that genre, and yeah, I wonder if you kind of are excited to kind of get into that, or how long you've been in that field.
I've just now, about 4 months ago, started actually producing music to specifically put my lyrics to. You know what I mean? So it's not been too terribly long.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've got a good compilation of poems that I've been writing for the last several years. So
Cool. Well, yeah. Good luck with that. It's really awesome.
thank you.
You've already got some fans here at Atheist Ed.
Appreciate that.
So great to talk to you, and great to meet you today.
Thanks.
So thank you guys. Yeah.
All right.